Greetings, sisters and brothers, comrades. Welcome to African History Club, episode number 51. I'm your host, Milton Alimadi. I want to thank everybody that is a supporter of African History Club. I have been finishing up the final touches on a book about the Battle of Adwa, the tremendous 1896 victory of Ethiopia over an invading imperial Italian army. And that is the reason why Ethiopia was the only African country that was not colonized during the scramble for Africa. Because of that tremendous victory at the Battle of Adwa, which is not widely known enough. I have just completed final touches on a graphic book, and that is the reason why I had not been able to update my podcast on a more regular basis lately. So going forward, I will be able to do much more frequent podcast episodes. Today, I would like to focus on Ghana, because last week was the week of Ghana's 65th anniversary celebration of Uhuru. Uhuru, of course, is the Kiswahili word for independence. So I want to dedicate this podcast to Ghana and to Kwame Nkrumah, and to Nkrumah's vision, his unrealized vision of a United States of Africa. A United States of Africa, which would actually address many of Africans' contemporary challenges. Challenges such as its location at the most peripheral, dependent position in the global system. A United States of Africa would have precluded that or mitigated that condition that currently afflicts every African country. Nkrumah knew the benefits of a United States of Africa, and it's well articulated in many of his books, in particular, Africa Must Unite and Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, that I've discussed in a previous podcast. Nkrumah warned in his book that without a United States of Africa, the continent would not be able to defend itself, to protect its sovereignty, and to protect its resources from the same former colonial powers who had exploited Africa for its resources and for its labor. So I've been doing more research on some of the reasons why the United States was so determined to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah's government. And in addition to Nkrumah's advocacy of a United States of Africa, the United States also never forgave Nkrumah for his intervention in Congo, where he tried his utmost best to protect the government of the nationalist Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, and indeed to protect Lumumba's life as well. After Congo won its independence in June 1960, the West, particularly Belgium, Britain, and the United States, were not willing to let Congo enjoy its independence and its sovereignty, not under Patrice Lumumba. Anyway, Lumumba had been mentored by Kwame Nkrumah. Ghana was the first African country south of the Sahara, former British colony, to win its independence in 1957. So Nkrumah became first prime minister and then later president after Ghana became a republic. Nkrumah hosted a very significant meeting the year after Ghana won its independence, the All Africa Peoples Conference, 1958, in Accra, the capital of Ghana. That conference invited the leaders of independence movements and national liberation movements from throughout Africa, the ones who were able to make it anyway. It was attended by Pan-Africans such as Frantz Fanon, for example. It was attended by Felix Mumi, a nationalist leader in Cameroon, whom I'm going to actually devote a podcast to discussing in the near future, and Patrice Lumumba, who was an independence leader in what was then Belgian Congo, was also able to attend that conference in Accra. And he made a very remarkable impression on Nkrumah. And Nkrumah decided to become his mentor, very close mentor, gave him significant advice, gave him material support in terms of his efforts to win the independence of the Belgian Congo. So by the time that Congo won its independence in 1960, Kwame Nkrumah was one of the most significant supporters of Patrice Lumumba, his government, and his country, giving him advice on how to administer the country, giving him advice on how to deal with the treacherous Western countries. Of course, that did not help. They were so determined to hold on and to control the resources of the Congo. The United States had engaged significantly when the country was still a colony, when it was still the Belgian Congo, engaged significantly with the country to obtain uranium, the uranium that was used to manufacture the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were built using uranium from what was then Belgian Congo. So the U.S. obviously was not happy when a nationalist prime minister, a Pan-African, Patrice Lumumba, was the one whose party actually won the democratic elections right before Congo's independence. So the United States worked very closely with Belgium and the United Kingdom to undermine Patrice Lumumba's government. They all encouraged the secession of the region known as Katanga, which at that time, and still today, contains much of the country's resources in terms of the copper and, in our contemporary era, the cobalt as well, which of course, as many of you know, is once again going to make Congo very significant, since EVs, electric vehicles, are now going to become a major component of national policy in all the industrialized countries as they move away from fossil fuel to EVs. And cobalt is required for the production of the batteries that power these EVs. So in 1960, the United States then encouraged, who was then a Colonel Mobutu Sese Seko, to overthrow Patrice Lumumba's government in September 1960. That was just 3 months after independence. Patrice Lumumba might have actually been killed much earlier. He was not killed till January 1961. He might have been killed earlier had it not been for the intervention of Ghana and Ghanaian soldiers who were part of the United Nations intervention force that was ultimately sent into the Congo. They protected him, they guarded his residence, and they prevented Mobutu's soldiers from simply just storming him, dragging him out, and taking him somewhere to be killed. Ironically, had Lumumba remained in his official residence, it would have been very difficult for Mobutu, the United States, Belgium, and for Britain to orchestrate his brutal assassination. It would have been very difficult, so long as it was still guarded by Ghanaian soldiers who were officially part of the United Nations contingent force, the intervention force. But after he was overthrown, some of his supporters, led by Antoine Gizenga and other officials from the legitimate government of the Congo under Lumumba, moved to the eastern part of the country, and they set up a rival alternative administration. And countries like Ghana, Egypt, which was then led by another Pan-African, Gamal Abdel Nasser, and Guinea under Sekou Touré, and a number of other African countries recognized that government in Eastern Congo as the legitimate government of the Congo. So Patrice Lumumba managed to escape from his official residence in an attempt to make it to Eastern Congo to join his supporters who had set up this new administration. However, along the route to the Eastern Congo, he was eventually captured by soldiers who were loyal to Mobutu, and he was brought back to the capital, and then Mobutu then handed him over to Moïse Tshombe, the Western puppet who had declared secession of Katanga. He was flown to Katanga, where he was then brutally killed in January 1961. So now, with the removal of Patrice Lumumba, the United States started focusing on its next target, which was Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana. Why? Nkrumah had espoused African unity, which of course would have made it very difficult for the Western countries to create all these neo-colonial weak regimes that we now see all over the African continent today. So that was a negative strike against Nkrumah. And then Nkrumah had advocated industrialization, saying African countries must stop exporting their precious minerals and natural resources as raw materials to the West, and then importing manufactured products at great multiples, prices that are great multiples relative to the raw materials that they exported, without which the manufacturers would not be able to be produced in the first place. That was the second major strike against Kwame Nkrumah. And then, as I just indicated, the third and most serious strike was his attempt to support Lumumba, support his government, and to defend and to protect his life. That was the most serious, and that was the third strike against Kwame Nkrumah. So beginning in 1961, after Kennedy had been sworn in as president, the United States Central Intelligence Agency started working very closely with some of his colleagues in government, people who were still on the same government with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana to overthrow him. It took from 1961 to 1966 before Nkrumah was ultimately overthrown by the military and the police in Ghana. And that was a serious blow, not only to Ghana, but for all Pan-Africanists and for all those who had still dreamed of creating a United States of Africa. So I want to read briefly from some segments from neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. I want to read some brief sections from the introduction, just so you can get a flavor of what Nkrumah was talking about if you are not familiar with this book, which, by the way, I highly recommend. And then shortly, I will also highly recommend another book that every Pan-African must read. But let me first read some segments from Nkrumah's book. Quote, "The essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subjected to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside." And that, of course, applies to pretty much every African country today. Let me read from another section. "Neocolonialism is based upon the principle of breaking up former large united colonial territories into a number of small non-viable states, which are incapable of independent development and must rely upon the former imperial power for defense and even internal security. Their economic and financial systems are linked, as in colonial days, with those of the former colonial ruler." Read from another section. "In the first place, the rulers of neo-colonial states derive their authority to govern not from the will of the people, but from the support which they obtain from their neo-colonialist masters. They have, therefore, little interest in developing education, strengthening the bargaining power of their workers employed by expatriate firms, or indeed of taking any step which would challenge the colonial pattern of commerce and industry, which it is the object of neo-colonialism to preserve." And that pretty much, once again, applies to most African countries and explains why the total disregard for the citizens in African countries. The electorate do not matter if the imposed ruler, the neo-colonial ruler, the dictator is maintained by the West. And that is what Nkrumah was writing about in 1965. And that is why this book is so invaluable in terms of most of the things that Nkrumah wrote about, commented about, have now materialized pretty much in most African countries. So let me now read the final section from the introduction to Nkrumah's book. Here we go. "I propose to analyze neocolonialism, first by examining the state of the African continent and showing how neocolonialism at the moment keeps it artificially poor. Next, I propose to show how, in practice, African unity, which in itself can only be established by the defeat of neocolonialism, could immensely raise African living standards. And of course, he's absolutely right. The continent is kept artificially impoverished. And by that he means, how can Africa have all the resources that is required by the industrialized countries to build wealth and prosperity in those countries while the African continent remains impoverished? It's artificial. And I do believe 100% that the solution that he offered still remains the only effective and viable solution to end the African condition, which of course is African unity. Now, the second book that I want to strongly recommend came out a few months ago. And this book really explains in remarkable detail the U.S. role in undermining Patrice Lumumba's government and the U.S. role in his assassination and the discussions about his assassination at the highest levels of U.S. government, including with President Eisenhower before he left office, before Kennedy was sworn in. And the detail is just remarkable. It's very chilling. And even though we know how brutally Lumumba was killed, this book really, with its tremendous detail, brings back the memory in such a powerful and vivid way that you'll actually feel profound sadness and pain as you read that section describing his capture and his ultimate assassination. And what is also most chilling is reading the conversations between the CIA agents, the people at the State Department, at the U.S. Embassy, people at the National Security Agency, and the White House. And it's just amazing. They are having normal conversations, as far as they're concerned, normal, benign conversations about how to kill a democratically elected African president. Remarkable. I strongly recommend this book. And the book also then details remarkably well the U.S. role in the removal of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. And the book, of course, is, many of you may have already heard about it and read it, White Malice, the CIA and the Covert Recolonization of Africa by Susan Williams. The book is 523 pages, but I guarantee you, if you are true Pan-African, if you're anti-imperialism, you'll find it difficult to put down this book. I have never been so fully engaged in a book that is this big and thick with so many pages before. Just absolutely brilliant writing, brilliant research. I reached out to the author and we exchanged some email messages. And it so happens that she has also read my book. And she also claims that she could not put down my book, which of course is Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. I've discussed it previously, and I will be doing another future podcast on my book as well. But for now, I strongly recommend Susan Williams' White Malice, if you haven't read it yet. And of course, I always recommend any book by Nkrumah, especially Africa Must Unite, as well as Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. Now, in my next podcast, I would like to discuss many of the hypocrisies that have now been exposed by the Ukraine war, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I will focus it in terms of its impact and its relations to Africa in my next podcast. So I thank you so much. I welcome the opportunity to be once again engaged with all of you on conversations about our beloved African continent. See you again soon. Thank you so much. Remain Pan-African.